Welcome to Career Coffee Chat Live. I'm your host, Erin Urban. I'm going to welcome you to the show today. As you tune in, please say hi, say your name, and say where you're from. I'd love to welcome you to the show. Today is a very important show. We'll be talking about how to leverage your zone of genius because it's a big myth that we can get more by doing more. In fact, while we're really, really good at putting more on our plates, that's not necessarily the path to success, and certainly not the path to seeing less stress and more achievable outcomes in our lives. But we're so good at putting more on our plate. So we'll talk about a little bit today about why that is, why we're addicted to busyness, why we think doing more gets more results when it doesn't, and most importantly, how to do less while achieving actually tangibly more results, and specifically the results that you want. So if you've never seen my smiling face before today, I want to welcome you to the show. Again, my name is Erin Urban, or Coachy Urban. You find out more about me at coachyurban.com. And what I do is I partner with high achieving leaders that feel overwhelmed, probably stressed, want a clear plan to leverage your zone of genius to increase influence while not sacrificing your well being. That's very important. And it's very interesting because I was having some conversations this week, and almost everybody I've talked to right now feels a little overwhelmed and a little burnt out. I think we're tired. I think we're tired of the rat race. I think we're tired of the situation as normal. I think we're tired of just everything that's going on in our lives, and we just don't want to deal with this any longer. We don't want to deal with the situation as normal. We want something. We want an option out. Okay, we want to get off the crazy train. I don't know if you remember in playgrounds where there was that the what I call the wheel of death. It was this merry-go-round, and you would get on the thing. I don't know how many broken legs have ever come off the merry-go-round, but when you go on the merry-go-round, I think that's how we feel like we're on the merry-go-round, and we just can't seem to get off of the darn thing. And I think a lot of us want a break. We're tired of situation normal and we want something different. So I'm glad that you're tuning in today. Again, please say hi, say where you're from, and welcome you to the show as you hop on because this is our time to collaborate together and talk about how to leverage your zone of genius because everybody has one. It's most important to identify what the heck your zone of genius is and how to leverage it. Because in your zone, if for those of you who are not like, what's a zone of genius? In your zone, you can actually achieve much more with a fraction of the effort. Who doesn't want that? So it's important to be able to clear your mind so you can access your state of flow and tap into your highest state of being, if you will, effortlessly. Um, Artists talk a lot about being in the state of flow. And what it is, it's a state where you are able to focus. Things seem to happen very naturally, very organically. It's not difficult. You're not feeling like you have to work harder to get something done. We can be very skilled in areas we don't really like to do, and you'll know it because while you may be very good at doing it, it may take a lot of effort, right? This state of being, this state of flow, if you will, isn't necessarily something that requires a lot of effort. It doesn't. It's not a state where you're like, gosh, I need another cup of coffee to get through this. That's not necessarily the case. And when you're accessing your zone of genius, you're leveraging your strengths. You're doing something that you're interested in. And you are also doing it in a physical state that supports your success. Because oftentimes we're doing things in the times that don't work for us. So we'll talk a little bit more about that later on in the show. But I see a couple of you tuning in, so I want to welcome you. Hi, Brian. Good to see you. Tuning in from Sugar Land, Texas. Hi, David. Always good to see you. Tuning in from Washington, D.C. How is it in Washington now, David? Did you get a lot of snow? I know a couple folks have gotten a lot of snow up north, and my dad sent me a photo yesterday 20 inches in Asheville, North Carolina. Whew. I love the white fluffy stuff when I don't have anything else to do except sit down with a good book and a nice crackling fire with lots of firewood and plenty of food in the fridge or in the pantry, and I don't have anywhere to go. But otherwise, it's a real pain. So if you identify with being a high achiever, so for those of you who are tuning in now or listening to the replay later, if you identify with being a high achiever, let me know. I mean, self-identify. I will be the first person to raise my hand here today. Say yes. Hi, my name is Erin. I'm a high achiever, overachiever, and yeah. So if that's you, raise your hand, share with us. Are you a high achiever? Is that something you identify with? Because being a high achiever, I don't know about you, but I find it can be a little stressful, right? And we do it to ourselves. That's the ironic part of it is we do this to ourselves. We're high achievers, like, yeah, we're go-getters, we get stuff done, and we're stressed out, and we're doing it to ourselves. So it's kind of funny that way. So I want to say hi to a couple of folks tuning in from YouTube as well. David says not much snow. Okay, well, not much snow in DC. Said snow the other night and washed away a few hours later. Oh, boo. That's dirty snow. That's the thing I don't miss about living back east is when it would snow a little bit and it was just kind of funky. You're like, oh. But on the other hand, if it snows and there's ice and there's snow and there's ice and you can't go anywhere for a week, you gotta go crazy too. So I'm glad you didn't get too much snow in DC. But let me know if you identify with being a high achiever. And if you tend to make things a little harder on yourself sometimes. I know I do. We want to do a lot. We want to take on a lot. We want to accomplish a lot. And chances are, if you're a high achiever, that's something you can identify with very quickly. Because with myself, I feel like, okay, well, if I'm going to accomplish more, so I need to do more. That's not necessarily actually what works. Sometimes that works. Oftentimes that doesn't work. And the beautiful thing is, when I was talking about zone of genius earlier, anyone can access their zone of genius if you have the right roadmap. So we're talking about today is identifying what your zone of genius is and being able to access that, because anyone has access to it if you have the right roadmap and have, guess what, a process. Shocking. Oh yes, I'm talking about process. I know you're totally shocked that I'm talking about that. But yeah, it really is. It's a process to identifying, what drives me, what gets me off my track, where do I show up the 100% with the most ease and grace, and without forcing myself through 14 cups of coffee or whatever, and being able to show up in a way that you have unlimited energy, or at least it feels like it, and it's effortless. You get a lot more accomplished. And most importantly, be able to prioritize better. We've talked a little bit about this through previous shows around mindlessness and my technique about being able to clear your brain, clear your cache in your brain. So kind of dump that, hit the reset button, so your brain can actually be refreshed and you be able to focus and prioritize and make better decisions. That's important as well. But today we're really focusing on the process to getting to know yourself and getting to know your zone of genius. So for those of you tuning in, let me know, what do you think about your zone of genius? Like, how do you identify with it? And what might that look like to you? Just give me a few notes in the chat. And if you're watching the replay later, feel free to comment in the chat as well, because I will see it and I will certainly reach out to you. So let me know what that looks like for you. Don't be shy. Go ahead and share, because again, the way I can help you is you by sharing with me, so I can help you grow and thrive. And that's really important this year as well. The first thing is, when we're talking about that pathway, that roadmap to getting to your zone of genius, is being able to know yourself to grow yourself, right? It's very hard, impossible, in fact, to develop something that we don't have a solid knowledge in. What we're doing is we're throwing something on a wall and seeing what sticks. And unfortunately, I know the hard way that this doesn't work. So we need to know ourselves to grow ourselves. What is your work style? How do you show up? How are you showing up? How do you infer information? How do you listen the best? What scenarios support, you and your energy zone? Are you more on the introverted scale? Are you more on the extroverted scale? Are you more task driven or people driven, right? Are you action oriented, or are you a thinker and a processor? So these are good things to know because it sets the foundation for everything else. And quite frankly, if you don't have this knowledge, it's very difficult for you to be able to see real tangible results as a leader and as someone as a professional, because you're just working on a lot of unknowns. And again, you're throwing something on a wall and seeing what sticks, or you just, well, maybe this will work. Well, if you have time and luxury to go through that, great. But if you know me, I'm all about efficiency, right? Let's get to it. Let's get to the core of it. Let's get to the meat of it and make this efficient, effective, and straightforward. So first thing first is getting to know yourself. And please don't take those strengths assessments that tell you're a lion or you're an eagle or a hippopotamus or whatever. I don't know. I mean, it's just silly. I mean, it's not useful at all. I leverage what's called extended DISC, and yes, they are only available through providers. There are other DISC assessments as well, but specifically when we look for those assessments that give you tangible, real outcomes. And I love extended DISC because it gives you an energy map, which we'll be talking more about in a moment. So that allows you to understand your quote unquote energy zones. Now, basically, when you're thinking about an assessment, whether it be DISC or Myers-Briggs or whatever. I think Myers-Briggs is a little too complex. That's why I go back to DISC. Superficially, it's very easy to consume and utilize. One of the things you want to look for is an assessment that tells you specifically, okay, look, you will gain energy in this scenario or situation, and you may lose energy in this scenario or situation. Very important to get a firm understanding of that, because what these assessments are doing are helping you understand that while you can still show up in any situation, I mean, you can show up 100% anywhere. And we only have so much energy during the day. So if you're showing up 100% in areas that are very draining to you, chances are at the end of the day, you'll be completely exhausted. So that's not what we want. So when I'm working with my clients through Career Clarity, for example, and identifying their strength zone and their zone of genius, we do these types of assessments. I do an extended DISC assessment, work style, advanced work style assessment with them. And we identify, okay, look, you can show up anywhere you are, right? And isn't it great to be able to leverage your strength zone and be aware of those situations that will constantly drain you so you can avoid roles or projects or overachieving. I'll volunteer for this project. It was totally outside of my natural proclivity and it will stretch me too thin. Because again, you hear this phrase, all true growth is found outside your comfort zone. Yes and no. There's a difference between found outside your strength zone and found outside your comfort zone. Okay. The two are not the same thing. All true growth is found by leveraging your strengths and then stretching yourself a little bit to leverage those strengths additionally in more areas. So get to know yourself to grow yourself. That's step one. And for anybody that's interested, we'll be diving in more detail and developing your zone of genius, what your values are, what your priorities are, what defines you as a human being, and maybe reverse engineering into some of these, and really some exciting work in my complimentary workshop that's coming up. And we'll be launching at first weeks of February, and registration is open now through January 27th. This is a commemoration of my 1-year anniversary, a celebration of that 1-year anniversary of my best-selling book, Elevate Your Career for More Impact and Income. So definitely want to sign up for that, and the registration is in the comments as well. So if you're interested and you really do want to take a deeper dive beyond the show into understanding your zone of genius and how to leverage it, I encourage you to sign up for the workshop because it's complimentary and you'll get to know more information. Great to see you, Hussein. He says, more reading about the circle of interest puts you in the zone of your genius. Okay, right. All right. Circle of interest. That's definitely an important part of it. He says also the author's follow-up to the books are within the circle of interest, put you in the zone of genius. Just focus on what you read and contemplate. Yeah, that's definitely good information. So there are a lot of people who use the zone of genius and they use it for different things. But for me, it's the being able to leverage your strengths on steroids, if that makes sense. So it's being able to leverage your strengths, your natural gifts, your talents, being aware of what your stressors are, also knowing your energy zones, so where you show up during the day, different times of the day, more powerfully than others. Some people are morning people. You hear this sometimes. Oh, I'm a morning person. Oh, I'm a night owl. Well, that just means that during that time of the day or evening, they have more energy than other times. And it's important to know this, actually. And the beautiful thing about remote work, for example, and for those people who are working remotely, within reason, you can schedule your work time. For some of us, again, this is not the case for everybody working remotely, but for a lot of people, you can do that. You're like, okay, I do better work after 8 o'clock p.m. at night and I sleep in the morning. If that's you, then great. If you can work your work schedule around that to do those heavy productive production, cognitive thinking times during your higher energy zones, do that. I'm a morning person. So I get most of my energy from sunrise till about noon. And then my brain's like, okay, I need a break. And then I get a second wind about 4:30 or 5, but I have to resist it because I need to make dinner. But so if you can work around your energy zones, that's very, very important. And also understand your stressors and derailers is important as well. Because we all have them and they're unique to us. They're not necessarily just defined by a DISC assessment or what have you. They're also defined by your life experiences, pet peeves, what your self-limiting beliefs are. Those can be stressors too. So keep that in mind. Sometimes these derailers can just be how we're wired. If you grew up in a very large, active household, chances are you will actually focus better when there's noise in the background. If you grew up in a more quiet or reserved household, chances are that would drive you nuts. So just knowing this, knowing how you are able to focus better, work better, show up better is very important to being able to identify. So all of these are part of your quote unquote zone of genius. So it's where you show up 100%. Does that make sense? So let me know, those of you who are tuning in, if this resonates with you and what questions you have. And if like you're identifying with it. Oh yeah, I grew up in a real noisy household, so I have to listen to the TV while I'm working, or the radio has to be on, or I have to wear headphones so I can listen to music. And my spouse drives them nuts, right? So, right? Because oftentimes different people, like opposite attracts sometimes. So David says, I'm an introvert, so I set regular informal check-ins with stakeholders. Good idea to keep myself on track and hold myself accountable. Also, I've discovered that I work best, how I work best, time of day, etc. Great, perfect. Yeah, and chances are, if you've been working for a while, you will figure this out. But we wanted to make sure we put the pieces together in almost like a map. This is a map for you and your zone of genius. So that's great. That's fantastic, David. You've been able to identify that. We really want to make this almost like a map for us. And that way, when we're thinking about opportunities, even maybe a career change, if we're thinking about different opportunities, projects, if we're a contractor or a consultant, we say, okay, well, this project, I need to be able to show up in this way, or the information is going to be delivered this way. And that's not necessarily something that's going to work with me. We can make very educated decisions on whether or not this is going to be something that will be productive for us or not. So one of the beautiful things about having this roadmap, if you will, or this map of our zone of genius, is being able to not only show up 100% with less effort, more ease, less stress, right? It's also being able to accomplish a lot more with less effort. Because here's oftentimes what happens, and I may repeat myself later on in the show because it's very important. This is oftentimes what happens if things aren't working, right? We're just maybe you're in a situation where things just they're not working. They're just it seems hard, or just stuff isn't going right. So what do? Well, for a high achiever, chances are we start doing more stuff, right? We're like, well, things aren't working, so let's just work more, or let's just do more stuff, or let's take on another project, or let's just do more, right? And so what happens is we just get all this stuff on our plate and it mounds up, but we don't really accomplish anything very well. And there's a good story I like to tell about this because it's a true story. I was having lunch with a young lady, mid-career professional, very much of a high achiever. Very important for her to be seen and noticed by the executive levels within her company. Okay, so she had volunteered for tons of different projects, volunteer projects. She involves herself in different projects. She's very active and outgoing and wants to be involved. So she has basically extended herself quite a bit. She's also on several different boards outside of work and all of these things. And it was very interesting to me because she was sharing with me, her sister had mentioned while she was over for dinner one day. She's like, sis, you're here, but you're not here. She was like on her phone and checking her phone, constantly distracted. And she started to realize that, yeah, this was really stressing her out. I mean, constantly, she was always late for things. She was struggling to accomplish and complete things, and she wasn't really showing up for her family either. And there was promotion come up. And she thought that because she had put herself out there for all these projects and made sure she was highly visible to executives, that she was going to get this promotion. But she didn't. This was devastating to her, right? Oh, and while she was doing all this, she was getting an MBA too. Yeah, so all the things. And when she was talking to me over this lunch hour, which she was 30 minutes late for, I brought a book. I knew what I was getting into. She was 30 minutes late. She showed up and she was like, "Oh my gosh, sharing with me all of this information." And I asked her, I said, "Do you feel like being involved in all these things helped you or hurt you?" She goes, "Now that I think about it, I don't think it helped me at all." I said, "Do you feel like you were a finisher or a completer?" She goes, "No." She goes, "You know what? You're right." She goes, "It was my fault. They passed me over for that promotion." She goes, "I was so focused on getting visibility, being in front of people, that I didn't think about the next thing, which was, great, you've got visibility, you're in front of people. What's the message you're sending?" So when you get that visibility, making sure that you're saying yes to the right projects that are in your strength zone, your zone of genius, right? And also projects that you can complete and show up 100%. Because if you are trying to do all the things, the chances are you will not be able to do anything well, right? There's a saying, you say yes to one thing, you say no, and you're saying no to something else. Whenever you say yes to one thing, you're saying no to something else. Very true. Very true. What are you saying no to? Is it something that's very important for you to be able to show up 100%? Could be, right? Because a lot of we're not great at being our own best friends. We're not great at recharging ourselves, giving back to ourselves. We just think, I could just push, 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 and there'll be no repercussions. Guess what? There is. And I think a lot of us are feeling that. So, like in 2020 was what I call the Great Reflection, and now we're seeing the Great Reset. For some people, that's a Great Resignation. Why? Why is that going on? Well, because we had time, whether we liked it or not, to reflect on our lives. The first time many of us in our entire career have had a time to pause at all. And we realized this is not what I want to do, where I want to be, etc. So this is one reason why I'm having this conversation, because as we move forward, we plot the path forward. What is that going to look like? And isn't it great when you can show up and feel good about it, feel grounded, feel balanced, feel centered, and feel like you are accomplishing your goals, right? So in order to do that, doing what we've always done is not going to work. So what are some other things that you can do to identify with your zone of genius and map that out for yourself? So some things you can think about for sure is, and for those of you tuning in and listening to the replay later, let me know what resonates with you and if you have any questions. Because, you might say, oh, well, I took a DISC assessment. Yeah, I know. Well, okay, what did you do with it? Did you have a decent debrief or not? And if you took it more than 5 years ago, chances are it's completely different. Because yes, your work style shifts as you gain experience, as you evolve as a person. So we talked a little about that, about getting to know yourself to grow yourself. We talked about getting to know your stressors and derailers, which are very important. And for some people, how do they work best? Maybe they need noise, maybe they need quiet. Um, what are your pet peeves that get you off track? And being aware of these, just really actually cataloging them and being aware of them. Because some of them, once you catalog them, be aware of them, they may be able to be mitigated. And others are just a part of your value stream, a part of your value system, a part of your priorities in life. Take, for example, if one of your pet peeves is people who are late really wind you up, you can ask yourself why, right? And we'll dive more about this particular exercise and others in my complimentary workshop coming up in February. Be sure to register. That is in the comments of this show. So again, we want to know what our stressors and derailers are and be able to create this complete map of how we show up. What's our zone of genius? What are some of the boundaries we need to set for our own well-being, right? And mapping our energy zones. Again, like David Eames mentioned, times of day you operate at peak productivity without excess coffee. And inputs and outputs, right? When you're thinking about your zone of genius and being able to show up 100%, your inputs matter. And they matter to a very finite degree that you may not even be aware of. Even the type of music you listen to matters tremendously to your mental tone, to your emotional tone. So if you're listening to heavy, mad rock music, punk rock or death metal or whatever, chances are you may be somewhat inclined to be a little bit angry because that's the emotions it's keying into. If you're listening to something depressing and sad, well, guess what? So we need to be careful about our inputs. Now, I'll give you an example from my personal life. When my husband and I first got married, he wanted to listen to the news first thing in the morning because he's a person that not a lot affects him. Okay, so you'll know this as if this is you. You're a person who can go into a lot of situations, scenarios, and it really doesn't impact you. But if you are a little bit more sensitive, have a higher level of empathy and engagement with others, you're very people oriented, you might be more impacted, right? So he liked to listen to the news in the morning, and that drove me nuts because, as we know, news typically doesn't focus on positivity, does it? No, it doesn't, unfortunately, do that. So I was being hammered by all this negativity first thing in the morning. It just did not do me any good with setting up my emotional center for the day because I needed to have my bucket, if you will, my cup, relatively balanced and not already swimming with stuff when I went to work because I knew that there's a lot of situations I would need to show up for. In order to show up for it, I need to have that fairly clean and clear and clarity and not already hashed up with a bunch of stuff. Give you another example. One of my clients, he was, a couple sessions, he was just seemed a lot of angst and a lot of stress. And well, the leader should be doing this and they're not doing that. And he was all mad and up in arms about things that basically he couldn't control. And so I was like, let's call him Stan. I said, Stan, what do you listen to things in the morning? Because he had mentioned in passing that he listened to talk radio while driving into work, and this was pre-pandemic. And he's like, yeah, I listened to this show. It's really insightful and goes into all the the evils of corporations and things. I was like, oh, okay, light bulb. I was like, do you think that might be setting the tone for you each day when you drive in? Well, I don't know. I think it just informs me because he was still not really connecting the dots. I was like, could you do me a favor? He's like, what? I was like, try not listening to it for a week. Why? I was like, and I explained to him, your inputs will affect your emotional mental tone. They just do. It's like eating garbage, right? If you go eat McDonald's, nothing against McDonald's for those of you who love McDonald's. If you go eat junk food, we'll just say junk food. Well, you go eat junk food for a week straight, well, you're going to not feel well. So it's the same thing when it comes to our mental inputs. What we listen to, those people who are around, and sometimes we can't control that. right? And just be aware of those things. So he did. He stopped listening actually for 2 weeks because after the first week he noticed he was a lot happier. And he goes, I feel a lot less stressed and a lot less mad. I was like, right. I was like, what do you want to do with that information? He goes, well, I guess if I do listen to it, I'll listen to it at a different time of day, but I won't listen to it first thing in the morning. I was like, okay. Yeah, because your inputs matter quite a bit. Um, let's see. Matthew just mentioned, he said, unless the weather or traffic was good that day. Right. So that's good. So unless the weather or traffic is good that way, Matthew, are you a big listener of things first thing in the morning? Oh, you're talking about the news, right? Oh, yeah. But when is, it's interesting. As I've read a book, and some of you have heard me talk about this book. It's called, I have it right here, Broadcasting Happiness, and she's a former broadcaster. Now she's a positive psychologist. And she was talking about during the book, actually, I can pull it out for you. Here it is, Broadcasting Happiness. And it is Michelle Gillian. And it's a pretty interesting book. And she talks about, a lot of about the power of promoting positivity, and not promoting stick your head in the sand like an ostrich and pretend the world doesn't exist. That's not what she's talking about, but it's just being intentionally aware of what you say and what you put out there, because that's my next point. um, to your point, Matthew, talking about, the media doesn't share anything positive unless the weather was good or traffic was good. When is traffic good anyway? When everybody's working remotely, I don't know. Anyway, so yeah, that leads me to my next point. Is it's not only the inputs we receive, being conscious of those, but it's also the outputs, what's coming out of us. Because what's very interesting is your brain is literal and it is listening to what you say, and it takes what you say literally. You need to be very careful about what you articulate. Yes. And this is not to freak anybody out and be like, oh my gosh, I can't say anything. That's not the point. Being aware if you have some pet phrases. For example, life is really hard. Or if it's not one thing, it's another. Caught my mother saying that a couple months ago. I was like, Mom, stop saying that. And I was like, it's just setting your brain up to filter out to make sure that you see another thing wrong so you can justify saying that, because that's what it does. I've talked about this before in some previous shows, but your brain, among other things wonderful, is also a highly advanced filter. So we receive somewhere around 11 million bits of information per second. However, we only process 50 to 60 bits per second. While that's a lot, that's not 50 to 60 million bits. That's only 50 to 60 bits out of 11 million bits. So you can see there's a lot of filtering going on. So our conscious mind is processing only a portion of what is actually being received by our senses. If we were to try to process all of it, it would be simply overwhelming. We wouldn't probably be able to function. So there's a very good reason for this. And what tells our brain what to filter and what not to filter is what we expect, what programs we set up, what outlines, what framework we've set up. So our mindset, if you will, is like a framework. It tells the brain, okay, well, Erin's positive or negatively focused, so that way I will show her these things. Or she expects to see a certain thing, like if the temperature is below 45, she's not riding her bike, right? So we're going to set up to where if the temperature is below 45, she's going to feel like this. So I have to be aware of these things and be like, okay, temperature is below 45. I'm going to read a book. Great. It's wonderful. And I have, because your brain has the best intentions. It really does. It's just trying to do its job. So we can't be mad at it, but just being aware of what we articulate and put out there, because our brain infers that as this is something I should do. So be careful about that. Right. So inputs and outputs. So I challenge you for the rest of the week just to be aware of what inputs you have. Now, if you are in a household that maybe you someone around you, friend, family member, what have you, that their inputs to you aren't the best. Remember, people can't drive you crazy unless you give them the keys, right? So just being aware of that, saying, okay, well, this person is someone who is more negatively focused, and I want to be more positively focused. One of the things you could do is just say, well, that's very interesting to look at like that. Is that helping you? Is that serving you? Or, well, thank you for sharing. This is how I choose to look at things, just being non-combative, because a lot of times people are a little bit combative about their negativity. So swinging into what's also very important. Speaking of inputs and speaking of the junk food comment earlier, body health. Body health matters a lot. Okay. I'm not a body health coach. Just putting that out there. I'm an executive coach. I'm a neuroscience nerd. I'm not a body health expert. And I've learned a lot because I've had to, because I have a lot of interesting health things that go on. So I need to know what helps me thrive. And I've had to learn a lot because I have chemical sensitivity syndrome, among other things. So that means I can't have anything that's not 100% natural, whether I like it or not. So I tell people I'm healthy whether I want to or not. Um, but body health matters. So when you look at it, if, for example, you're not a person that feels like you need to get much sleep, whether that's because of choice or otherwise, perhaps you're like one of those people I've heard before that say, oh, I'll sleep when I'm dead. Well, if you don't sleep much, that may happen a lot faster than you want. Body health matters. So what are you doing physically? Because here's the thing. Your brain is a wonderful tool, and all these things we're talking about are mainly a area of the brain, if you will, or outgrowth thereof. But your body supports the mind. So if the body isn't healthy, chances are things aren't going to work out very well. Getting good sleep, getting reasonable exercise, what are you eating? Are you intaking things that are helping you and supporting you or not? So just being aware of that is important because it's a whole symbiosis process here, and not just you plunking down in front of the computer and deciding what you want to do that day. It's much more than that, right? Are you drinking organic coffee versus other kinds of coffee? I'm not here to nitpick your coffee, okay? But you get the point. It's important to be aware of not only the mental inputs, but also the physical inputs and what we're doing with ourselves. Because your body matters. Your body supports everything that you do. And if you're not taking care of it, well, good luck in getting a lot accomplished because it can't give what it doesn't have. So if you have a diet that's poor, or if you're never exercising or what have you, it will show up in other areas. So it's just being aware of that because body health is a part of this zone of genius. And everybody has a different way of getting healthy. Not everybody has to be a marathon runner. If you live in Houston, Texas, that happened this past weekend. Good for you folks out there running. You will not catch me running unless it's away from something a lot bigger than meaner than me. Not happening. However, on a bike, I'll be right there. Otherwise, not happening because that's just how my body is constructed. So, what works for one person may not work for another person. One of my friends, she went to the gym this morning. I have no desire to go to a gym. It's not my thing, but there are many other things that I do to keep healthy, like yoga. Whatever, maybe that's a walk. It doesn't matter really what you do. That's fairly immaterial as long as you are aware and conscious of the physical body being a part of the system, right? Does that make sense? So hopefully that makes sense for you. Speaking of the physical body being a part of the system, your brain is part of the physical body, and making sure that's there and available to support you is very important. Now, why do I say that? What do I mean by that? Well, for those of you who have seen me before, you may have heard me talk about brain breaks or taking intentional pauses throughout the day. Guess what? I'm going to reiterate taking the importance of taking intentional pauses throughout the day and the value of brain breaks. What is a brain break? Well, some research has shown that if you do heavy cognitive tasks for an extended period of time, your productivity sees a definite decline after about an hour and a half. It depends on various people. Some people are 2 hours, but between an hour and a half to 2 hours, you see a significant decline in productivity. You have trouble focusing, staying on task, making decisions. Your EI, or emotional intelligence, will actually decline. So for those of you who are really good at pushing yourself through to get things done and not really taking a break at all, just breathe. And later in the day, you're a little cranky. Well, guess what? Yeah, you did that to yourself a little bit. So you might want to consider an alternate method. And what I've found is that brain breaks are tremendously helpful, very useful, and a great way to get through an entire day at peak productivity, at peak cognitive function. So what I do is I will intentionally take my breakfast without looking at my phone and scrolling through a whole bunch of social media, looking at all my emails and trying to answer my emails. I'm present for breakfast. So I'm not occupying my brain already the first thing in the morning through breakfast. And I have that with my family. And then I go into the workday. About mid-morning, I'll take another brain break. In fact, I took one right before the show. A little break, 5 to 10 minutes. Nothing fancy required. You can just simply go for a walk out to the porch, or go to another room, or wash the dishes, or walk the dog, or whatever it is, as long as it doesn't require your brain to do something else. So brain break does not consist of you hopping off your computer and getting on your phone, looking at videos or answering emails in another device. That does not work. No, that's a big fail for the brain break. So brain break means you take your mind off heavy cognitive task, and you just let it relax for a few minutes. It's similar to a muscle you're trying to work out. So if you are a runner and you did go do the Houston Marathon last weekend, it would almost be like, if you didn't do this, it would almost be like trying to sprint for miles. Doesn't work, does it? No, you need to have a break occasionally. So same thing for your brain. Your brain needs just a pause to refresh, replenish its energy stores, and then it'll be ready for you when you come back to sit down in front of your computer or whatever device you're working on. Make sense? It's pretty easy. So doing this about every 2.5 to 3 hours at most is ideal. I take 4 or 5 a day. On a good day, I try to take mid-morning, of course, the lunch, and then mid-afternoon, pause and reflect at the end of the day. It's not complicated. Super easy. Doesn't take much time at all. And it's very, very useful for you to stay in peak form. So just to rehash or recap some of what we talked about today is knowing yourself to grow yourself. So understanding your work style, your communication style, your listening style, how you infer information the best way. Some people are very visual, some people are very tactile. What is the best way for you to learn and get information? And then what are your stressors? What are your derailers in your life? What gets you off track? Who and what might shift you off your path? And then understanding your energy zones. When and where do you show up the best? 100% peak energy? Is that morning? Is that evening? Is that several times a day? Are you an all day go, go, go person? Great for you. But knowing when you show up the strongest helps you tremendously. If you need to do something that requires a lot of cognitive function, you can show up more effortlessly then. Then inputs and outputs. What are you taking in, both mentally and physically, and how is that affecting you? Just being aware of that, and affecting your mood, your temperament, how you feel, how well your body is supporting what you want to do, etc. And then, of course, building in these intentional pauses throughout the day to allow your cognitive function to refresh, get its energy stores back up so it can keep serving you at the highest level. Now, what stops us from doing all this and being in our zone of genius? And by the way, there is a few other things we haven't talked about, like knowing your values, knowing your priorities in life and what you want to accomplish. And that's more of what we'll be working on during my complimentary workshop in February. And registration is open now, as I mentioned before. But what stops us from leveraging this zone of genius, where we can show up with less effort and get more accomplished? Well, one of the things I've talked about before is thinking more that's better, adding more on a plate, and overachieving, right? And busyness. If things aren't working, we just do more instead of recalibrating and making sure that what we're actually doing is what we need to be doing in the first place is actually a high ROI. Oftentimes we're not doing that. Or, and this is also true for a lot of us, and I've done this too, when things are broken or not in our careers and our lives, or we're going through something, we use being busy as a numbing device so we don't have to think about it. Yep, I've done that. We just are like, okay, well, life is pear-shaped and something is awful going on, so I'm just going to be busy so I don't have to focus on it. So I can distract myself. It's a distraction, just being busy. So let me know if that resonates with you. And speaking of distractions, we have our social media, we have our TV shows, we have, all the things that we love to distract our minds and our brains so we don't have to process things that aren't working for us. We do that a lot. Now, sometimes, I'll watch a show because that's interesting and entertaining for me and it's educational or whatever. But it's the why, right? Why are you doing it is important to understand. If you're distracting yourself because you don't want to deal with something that needs to be dealt with, well, that's not going to help you show up 100% in your zone of genius because you can't if your foundation's not stable. Make sense? So hopefully this was helpful for you today. And let me know if you have any questions at all about the zone of genius, how to get there, your path to success, etc. I'm very excited about the upcoming workshop that I won't bore you to death about, but it is fantastic because we're talking about not only how to access and leverage your zone of genius, but also how to create a clear career pathway, a roadmap for career advancement, and getting more clarity and confidence in quote unquote your future of work, whatever that looks like for you. And most importantly, being able to show up 100% in all the spaces that you're in and overcoming any roadblocks that you have right now. And there are only a few seats left. So I would encourage you, if you're on the fence or not quite sure, if you feel like you can show up for this workshop, I would encourage you to do that. And again, if it's not for you, maybe you can refer someone to it you feel like that would benefit, because this is something I'm doing to celebrate the 1-year anniversary of my best-selling book, Elevate Your Career for More Impact and Income. Now, for all of you tuning in and or watching the replay later, it's a great pleasure to show up here and share space with you today and share insights and knowledge. If you do have any questions or you marinate on this later and you're like, I wonder about, feel free to reach out to me. You know how to get to me on LinkedIn. And if we haven't connected on LinkedIn, please let's correct that. And don't forget, there's also, of course, my podcast and all these replays from my live show available on my YouTube channel, which I will share in the comments as well. So for all of you, my friends, it's my wish for you that keep elevating, and I'll see you next time.